So, if I can start, then
Yes, sir.
I've I've been farming here since 1980 and growing fruit and nut trees. When I first came here, I wanted to be as self-sufficient as possible, so I figured I'd try and grow a little bit of everything that might grow here. And one of the first things I did was to graft apple trees. I'd never grafted anything before, but I figured out how to graft trees, and I grafted a bunch of apple trees, and we still grow a lot of apples. I grow uh, about 80 varieties of apples, and um, and apples are great. We enjoy apples from late July, early August until well, we've got some varieties that'll keep into early July now. And so there's certainly great diversity of apples. We've got a 7-volume set on apple varieties that lists 7,500 named varieties known in North America. Now, um, what I'd like to talk about today are not apples, but a few of the other fruits that have been and nut crops that have been real successful for us, easy to grow, easier than apples. The problem with apples, I found was, for one thing, 100 years ago, there was about 900 acres in apple production in Lewis and Thurston County, and now there's virtually none, and it's all moved to eastern Washington, of course, with the Columbia River irrigation project. And it's easier to grow apples in desert areas than it is in wet western Washington. There's just more disease issues here, and so we've gravitated towards scab-resistant varieties of apples for the most part. And we still grow a lot of heritage varieties also, especially ones that are scab-resistant. But apples are a bit of a challenge because of a couple of insects, for one thing, organically especially. So, the codling moth and apple maggot are real problems. And So that's the only crop that we spray ever, is to control codling moth and apple maggot in apples. And we use an organic spray called Entrust. Spinosad is the active ingredient, and you can spray a fruit and eat it the next day. It has no toxicity to mammals, birds, just insects. So anyway, um, I one thing I like about Asian pears is that they're much easier to grow than apples around here, because I don't have any problems with insects or diseases with Asian pears. They're very easy to grow organically, and Asian pears, there's varieties that keep really well, as they have crunchy and juiciness as good as any apple if it's a good variety of Asian pear. And the season for Asian pears extends from late August for the earliest ripening varieties to Yakumo, Ichiban Nashi, Sensui, to late fall harvesting of varieties like Korean Giant. Korean Giant Asian pears are still good. Well, I had some into July, early July. They were still edible, although they'd lost their crunch by then. But I enjoy Asian pears as much as I enjoy apples. They're crunchy, juicy, and sweet, and easy to grow. They're also very quick to bear. Um, they are heavy bearing trees, such that we need to spend a few days thinning the fruits every year to keep them from overproducing and breaking branches. So we find them, and they don't have scab. The European pears, I just read a book on European pears here. It's called The Book of Pears. And it's written by an English woman who is really fixated on the European pears. And I love European pears, don't get me wrong. But European pears are more finicky here. For one thing, they get scab. Unlike Asian pears, they get scab. And it's a different type of scab than apple scab, but it is a problem in our wet climate, which is why Most European pears are grown commercially in eastern Washington or the Hood River Valley of Oregon or California, places like that, or Southern Oregon. They do have disease issues here. And it's interesting too. One thing I picked up in reading this book is that the European pears have only achieved greatness in terms of dessert fruits just in the last few hundred years. If you go back to medieval times, for example, um, pears were not eaten as a fresh fruit at all. They were cooked entirely, pretty much. And and it's only in the last few hundred years that Europeans developed, the French and the Belgians and the English developed really good tasting pears with the melting buttery texture that we associate with wonderful European pears. And with European pears, you have to be kind of precise about when to harvest because they if you wait until they're tree ripe, then they're likely to have internal breakdown already inside. So you have to get them before they're soft. With European pears, uh, one good criteria for when to harvest is if you can grasp the fruit and twist it and lift it and it comes off easily, and the fruit will still be firm, hard, and not really ready to eat for the most part. Cutting into it, the seeds should be dark, almost black. And that is when you want to pick European pears, before they're soft. If you wait until they're soft, then they're not going to keep, and they may be starting to go rotten already. So that's a critical thing with European pears, is to be very precise about, for each variety, when to harvest. With Asian pears, that's not an issue. You can is If you bite into one and it's not sweet, then just wait a little longer until they get sweet. And of course, once again, the criteria of being able to lift and twist it, come off easily with dark seeds is another good example of when to harvest them. But they are to be a very rewarding fruit. We get a nice crop every year. Although it was a bit down this year because of a late frost, we still managed to get a crop. And uh, and it's a fruit that we enjoy about 9, 10 months out of the year. Of course, in the summertime, when they're faded, we have cherries and mulberries and figs, so raspberries and strawberries. So I can do without for a couple of months anyway. So and in addition to eating them as a fresh fruit, we also make a pear cider, um, which we sell at our stand at the farmers market in Olympia, and we also do an Asian pear wine, and and they are popular. We like them. So another fruit that I would like to discuss today is this evening is the kiwi fruit. Now, the first thing I ever grew before I grew any vegetable or flower or anything was a kiwi seed. I stuck a kiwi seed in a pot uh, when I was in college, and that it sprouted, and it was just in a windowsill, and it grew up the top of the window and around the top and down the other side. And I was very impressed by the beauty of the vine. The new growth was bright red with hairs, and the leaves were really cool looking. And I had now that vine is still around. I kept it going and planted it out, and it turns out, fortunately for me, it was a female. Um, and the thing about growing kiwis from seed is they take about 10 years before you know if you've got a male or a female vine. So it takes a lot of patience, and it's not recommended to grow them that way. In fact, when I've grown them that way, I've gotten more males than females. Um, and in our commercial kiwi vineyard, we only have one male per every 12 or 15 females. So that's all that's necessary, really. Um, so we keep that to a minimum. But nowadays, when we sell, incidentally, that one original vine is growing on a trellis, And this is a fuzzy kiwi, so it produces the fruit, like this, and keeps very well. The fuzzy kiwis, we harvest them as late as possible in the fall because the later you can go without harvesting them, the longer they're going to keep. And so we never harvest them before until after Halloween and as close to Thanksgiving as possible as we can let the crop go before real hard freezes. As long as the vines still have leaves on and it's not going to get below 26 or so, we just let the vine continue to hold the fruit. And then only when real hard frost threatens do we go out and pick them. And by harvesting them so late, and they're still hard as a rock and totally inedible when we harvest them. Now, by harvesting them so late in the season, that really contributes to their great keeping quality. We generally will have kiwi fruits to eat into through June into early July. By then, they're all getting pretty soft. But just in common refrigeration, they're very good keeping fruits. Nowadays, when we sell kiwi vines, we do not grow them from seed since there's no way of telling from seed which sex they're going to be for 10 years. So what we do is we grow them from cuttings, and they're pretty easy to root from cuttings, actually. You can also layer them as a vine, bending them down and burying part of the vine in the early summer, and they'll make roots where you bury them, or you can just take foot-long cuttings or 6-inch cuttings and stick them in a pot, and they'll generally root. You can root them as hardwood cuttings. You can even root them as softwood cuttings in the summer. At any rate, so we find that with the fuzzy kiwis, because they never get soft on the vine, we don't have any predation from critters at all. We have no insect problems associated, no wildlife predation on the fruits as they're ripening. They're very easy to grow organically, very satisfying. The original vine that I planted out, Big Mama, we call it, because it's allowed to take up a fairly large amount of space, and it even grows into an adjoining walnut tree every year. We have to prune it out of the walnut tree. And we typically get between 250 and 450 pounds from this one vine. And so it's quite remarkably productive. We don't grow the fuzzy kiwis, though, on a commercial basis, except on a small scale. We sell the fruits down at the farmer's market, and that's about it. The one kiwi vine that we do grow commercially are what we call the hardy kiwis, and they're called hardy kiwis because the original plants came from Russia. They're native to East Asia, so an area from Siberia into Manchuria and North Korea and into Hokkaido, Japan, is where the hardy kiwis are native. Now, they're a much smaller fruit than the fuzzy kiwi, but they're smooth-skinned, and they produce their fruit in large clusters. When we sell them as plants, we call them hardy kiwis because they'll take about 25 or 30 below zero. But when we sell the fruit, we market them as kiwi berries because they're a small, smooth-skinned fruit that we put in baskets like we sell blueberries or raspberries. We put them in little baskets. And they will get soft on the vine. But we found that if we harvest them before they get soft, then they have an excellent keeping quality of several months. And so the clue that we use to know when to harvest our kiwi berries is if we can find, well, we use a refractometer. But what I tell people is if you don't have a refractometer, if you can find one berry out of 100 that's soft, that's your clue to go ahead and harvest the whole crop. Because even though they are not edible at that point, when they're hard, they are not edible at all. But if you give them, if you harvest them when they're hard, you don't have to be so cautious about squishing them. And they'll keep for months, for several months, if you harvest them when they're hard, when they're firm. and just refrigerate them. You can just refrigerate them. We dedicate a 40-foot cooler to kiwi berries in the fall when we're harvesting them. And then if and our kiwi berries get shipped, as far as LA and east to Philadelphia and places, just all over. They get shipped. And and if the wholesaler wants them ripe, we can get them to them ripe, just by taking them out of the cooler a week ahead of time to let them soften up. And for the homeowner, if you pick them hard and you want to ripen them right away, just leave them at room temperature, put them in a plastic bag with an apple, and the ethylene will ripen them up in a few days. And so, but if we put them in the coolers when they're firm, and we're harvesting them in September now, in the case of these kiwi berries, more or less, depending on the variety, anywhere from early September to early October, depending on the variety. But if we harvest them when they're firm and refrigerate them, we're able to market them as a fresh fruit into the first week of December. So they'll keep for several months, as long as they're picked when they're firm. And in addition to the green skin varieties that we grow, the hardy kiwi berries, there are also several red and purple fruited varieties that we grow. One is called Ken's Red, one is called Hardy Red, and their interior color is red or purple, as well as the skin color. Now the skin is green until they're dead ripe, and only then do they turn the purple color. But they're very good. They're very good keepers also. For the most part, they need male and female, like the fuzzy kiwis, in order to make fruit. We do have one variety. It's a variety called Isai from Japan, and that variety is able to set fruit by itself. So it's not as productive as it is if there's a male nearby, but it is able to produce by itself. It's a little less vigorous than some of the other kiwi species as well. But these kiwi fruits taste really great, and they've become very popular. We do a kiwi jam. That's real popular, and we do a kiwi sauce. Now our kiwi sauce is mixed with apple. It's a kiwi apple sauce, and we also do a kiwi wine, and anyway, and I've noticed recently there's some new types of kiwi that I've seen in grocery stores that are larger, and they're larger, and it's more smooth skin than the traditional fuzzy kiwi. All these kiwis, they're all native to East Asia, and the only association they have with New Zealand is that the New Zealanders were the first to domesticate them for markets in the Northern Hemisphere. The New Zealanders started growing kiwis only when a New Zealand missionary priest working in China early in the 20th century was very pleased by the kiwi vines that he saw growing wild in China, just climbing up trees and such. So he sent some of the seeds, just the seeds, back to some friends in New Zealand, some farmer friends, and they planted them out and grew them as an ornamental vine for many years until they started fruiting. And then they realized they had a great fruit that would keep in a ship from New Zealand going up to the United States or Europe, and the slow boat, and still be good. So it was a perfect export market from New Zealand. And that's how they got the association with New Zealand. They're not native to New Zealand at all. But nowadays, I've seen in some of the grocery stores some real large kiwi fruits, and one of them is with a smoother skin that's yellow, and another one is a yellow flesh with a red interior, I've noticed recently. And these are a new species of kiwi vine native to North America called Actinidia chinensis. and Actinidia chinensis is, I think that it may have potential here. It's certainly a nice big fruit, and with different color, tastes similar to the other kiwis. Um, I haven't fruited it yet. I'm just getting started with them. So it'll be a few years. I don't know of anyone that has successfully fruited them in Washington yet, but I think that they might work here. So um, one interesting thing too that I've noticed about the two different species of kiwi that we do grow commercially, the fuzzy kiwis and the hardy kiwis, Actinidia arguta and Actinidia deliciosa, respectively, is that they bloom at the same time. Even though they ripen at radically different times, they bloom at the same time. So they're able to cross-pollinate each other. So we actually use one of the fuzzy kiwi males in one of our kiwi vineyards as a pollinator for hardy kiwis because they have bigger flowers. They have bigger flowers. And these are very vigorous vines. These vines can grow 10 feet a year. And as I mentioned, they can produce quite heavy yields. We've gotten several 100 pounds on a hardy kiwi as well. In fact, one of the Ken's red kiwis that we've let it grow wild on a trellis so that it's taken over about 50-foot length of trellis, also produces about 450 pounds on one plant. So um, which is why we've gotten into the wholesaling aspect. And these vines were real tree climbers too. We've got some 60, 70 feet growing up a hemlock tree. So that's how they grow in the wild, in the conifer forests of Siberia where they're native. Now there is a less vigorous type of kiwi, also a third species, and it's called Arctic Beauty kiwi, because it is found in the colder part of Russia, in Siberia, and it will take minus 40 degrees. And Arctic Beauty kiwi is Actinidia colomicta. And Arctic Beauty kiwi is often grown just for its interesting variegated foliage. The leaves will be green at first, and then they'll look like the ends were dipped in white paint, and then they'll have pink splotches throughout the leaf. And so it's an interesting ornamental vine, as well as being a good tasty fruit. Now the fruits are small. They're the smallest of the three species, and their earliest ripening, they are ripe around the end of August or the first few days of September. But they are smooth-skinned. They're very shade tolerant. They're the most shade tolerant. And the Actinidia arguta, the hardy kiwis, are also shade tolerant. This one is less vigorous. They come into bearing very quickly, often within a year or two of being planted, they'll start fruiting, whereas the other species will take 3 or 4 or 5 years to start fruiting when they're grown from cuttings. But Arctic Beauty kiwis are very ornamental, less vigorous. And I'll tell you, we've lost quite a number of trellises by not building them heavy enough to support the weight of all the fruit. So, it's something to keep in mind. If you grow them, if you grow them on a fence or a deck, or a trellis or an arbor or up a low branching tree, if you let them grow up a low branching tree, make sure it's a shade tolerant low branching tree. Like they could eventually kill a fir because firs are not shade tolerant conifers, whereas hemlocks, spruces, and cedars are shade tolerant, and so they can tolerate a vine growing on them without shading them out excessively. And whereas a fir would not tolerate that. So anyway, we've found the kiwi vines to be. Now, if you need more information on the kiwis, let's see, the Oregon State University has published this booklet on called "Growing Kiwi Fruit," and I think that you can pick it up at any extension service office. I think they charge a couple bucks maybe for it, but it's a 30 some pages of basic information on anything you'd need to know about growing kiwi fruit, hardy kiwi or fuzzy kiwi. So that's something to be aware of. Um, so another fruit that I'd like to discuss today, kind of not too widely known in the Pacific Northwest here, more common in back east and in other parts of the world, is the mulberry. Now, the mulberry is a tree that's been domesticated for thousands of years. The Chinese figured out silkworm culture, uh, domesticating a caterpillar that eats mulberry leaves exclusively, and then they weave they make these cocoons. Then the silken threads within the cocoons are the fabric silk, and so the Chinese established plantations of mulberry trees for that purpose of harvesting the cocoons of the silkworm caterpillar to make the fabric silk. And the whole Silk Road trade route between Asia and Europe was, kind of, that was one of the biggest trade items. And in addition to producing leaves that caterpillars like, the leaves are also used in teas, uh, and even can be eaten when they're very young leaves. They can be eaten as a fresh vegetable, as a salad green. But primarily, mulberries uh, association with food has to do with their berries, which are among the sweetest of all berries. They're very sweet berries. Um, and mulberries are found from Central Asia up into Russia, and they will grow just about anywhere. And in the eastern United States, we have the red mulberry, which is native. The white mulberries are native to Asia, as are a different species, the black mulberry, native to Iran. And uh, the black mulberries are Morus nigra. Those are a more complex flavored berry. They're rounder like a blackberry, but much sweeter than a blackberry when they're dead ripe, although the skin is a little tart. And so they have an interesting complex flavor. The biggest drawback to the black mulberries are that they are very soft and extremely messy fruits. So you really don't want to plant them near an area where you would have a patio or park a car or something like that, where the stain could be an issue, um, because they are truly messy. They are delicious, but very messy. Um, and they're very long-lived trees. Henry VIII brought in mulberry trees, intending to establish a silkworm industry in England, um, in 1500s, and those trees are still there. They're still producing. Unfortunately, that was the wrong species of mulberry. The silkworm caterpillars did not like that species. Um, they don't eat those leaves. They only eat the Morus alba species of mulberry. And Morus alba, despite the fact that alba means white, um, the fruits can be white or black or red for Morus alba. We have many cultivars of mulberries that we grow commercially at our farm. The one that I started with back around 1982 was a variety found in a hedgerow along a road in Illinois called Illinois Everbearing. And Illinois Everbearing, since the year after I planted it, it's fruited every single year. It comes out of dormancy late in the spring, so it's not affected by late frost. So since 1983, it's produced a heavy crop every single year. And we start harvesting it around the end of June, and we harvest it twice a week through July, August, and September. So it really earns the moniker Everbearing. Twice a week, what we do. Now, I didn't know better when I planted my Illinois Everbearing tree. So I have two trees. And so I didn't prune them right away. So they quickly shot up to 20 plus feet. And I'm sure they'd get bigger than that. Nowadays, what we do is we take some bamboo poles and wrap a towel around the end, and then we push bird netting up over the tree. and we enclose a 20-foot tree with bird netting because birds love mulberries. They're very nutritious fruits, and the birds love. They're very sweet, and um, what we do with that tree is we put clean sheets underneath it, and we knock the branches with a bamboo pole, and all the ripe ones come down onto the sheet. And then we gather them up and we just throw them in the freezer. And then on a rainy day, we make them into jam or wine. And uh, here's our mulberry jam that we produce. Um, and they're basically a seedless fruit. Well, they have seeds, but the seeds are so tiny, it's like a blueberry seed, so you don't notice them really. Um, and they make a great wine and jam, juice, and pies. Very versatile fruits, great for snacking. You can freeze them, of course, like any fruit. And um, mulberry trees, like kiwi vines, are either male or female. But unlike kiwi vines, mulberries do not require a male tree in order to make fruit. It's been a shame, but I've heard of some areas where grafted male mulberry trees are extensively planted as as shade trees in urban areas. And in places like Phoenix, Arizona, where people have migrated from the north to, and sometimes because they have pollen allergies, and male mulberries are kind of notorious for producing pollen that a lot of people are susceptible to. Um, and but we don't mess with male mulberries here on the farm because it's not necessary to have a male to get good fruit. So so we don't have any males anywhere near our orchard. And all the mulberry trees that we sell are grafted females, or they are cutting grown females, self-rooted. Um, so nowadays we grow mulberries commercially. The main variety that we grow commercially for as a fresh fruit is a variety called Pakistan. Pakistan is the world's largest mulberries. They can get 3.5 up to 4 inches long. Um, it's a very vigorous variety. Um, I've grown it for a dozen years now. And when we saw how good they tasted and how well they kept for a mulberry and how large the fruit was, we realized that this was the variety that we wanted to grow as a commercial fruit for the market, as a fresh fruit. So we use the Illinois everbearing and other varieties that we have in our processing for jams and wines and juices. And the Pakistan is the variety that we use to market as a fresh berry. And we put them in berry containers just like we would sell raspberries, but they keep better than raspberries. They're a really tasty fruit and easy to grow, very quick to bear fruit. And the first thing I did when I planted 300 Pakistan mulberries out for a commercial planting is I cut them back to 2 feet. Even though when I planted them out in the nursery, they were like 6 feet tall, 7 feet tall, I cut them back to 2 feet. And the reason why I did that is I knew that what I wanted to do is I knew that they had the potential of getting 30 feet tall. And if we allowed them to get 30 feet tall, they would be way too big and way too much trouble to net. And so to keep the birds out of them. And so I resolved to grow them not as a tree, but as a multi-stemmed shrub. So by cutting them back to 2 feet, I encouraged the real low buds to become low branches. And when they shot up and grew real vigorously, I would prune them back during the growing season to make them produce lots of short side branches so that we're maintaining them under 8 feet with fruiting areas starting 2 feet off the ground. And so we've got dense, rounded bushes of mulberries pruned heavily every winter and summer as necessary to keep them under 8 feet so that we can go into the patch that's totally netted and and just harvest to our heart's content, to hand harvest them into baskets to sell as a fresh fruit. So uh, there's also white fruiting mulberries, and the white fruiting mulberries sometimes are solid white, sometimes they have a little tinge of lavender or pink to them. Uh, the white fruiting mulberries are not they're not going to stain uh, an area, and they tend to be very sweet. They're grown commercially on a large scale in places like Turkey and Iran, Iraq, um, because they're very well adapted to heat, and they grow well for us too, though. And they're a great drying fruit. And so uh, dried white mulberries are, almost, they're like candy. They're just sugary sweet, and can be used as a sweetener, in fact. And we found certain varieties like the sweet lavender. Um, in August, if you don't harvest them, they'll dry right on the tree. Um, and Incidentally, I just want to step back with the kiwi vine tale for a minute. I When I first started growing kiwi vines, and getting serious about kiwi fruits, um, I was a member of the North American Fruit Explorers, and one of the founding members offered to the membership free cuttings of kiwi vines to anyone who sent him a stamped self-addressed envelope. He would send a couple of little twigs of kiwi uh, to root as cuttings. And so I sent away my envelope with extra stamps, and he sent me a couple of kiwi cuttings, a male and a female. And so those were some of the first hardy kiwis that I ever grew. And he was from the Chicagoland area, and my wife was from there. And so one Thanksgiving, when we were visiting family, I paid this fellow a visit, only to find out that he'd had a stroke and was no longer able to get out into his vineyard and harvest the fruit that year. But he invited us to take a look at his kiwi vineyard. We walked out there. This was at Thanksgiving now. In Chicago, it gets very cold and windy by Thanksgiving. So the kiwi fruits that had gone unharvested um, had freeze dried on the vines, and they were delicious. So that's another thing you can do with kiwi fruits, is dry them, and as well as with mulberries. And they the mulberries. There's also ornamental forms of mulberries. There's a weeping mulberry that we grow. It has no upright tendency whatsoever. So if the weeping mulberry is not staked initially, it will just be a ground cover. So what we do in the nursery is we'll stake them up to 3 or 4 or 6 feet to get them upright off the ground. And then after a year, you can take away the stake, but then all of the new growth will cascade in all directions and touch the ground in all directions. And it bears fruit all summer also, like Illinois everbearing. It's not as big a fruit, but it's very productive and very sweet. And it's the most weeping plant I've ever seen, having no upright tendency whatsoever. So you just stake it up to the height you want it to weep from, and it'll weep to the ground in all directions and bear fruit every year, unless you get a grafted male weeping mulberry, which is also sold in the nursery industry, the non-fruiting males. So beware, if you're interested in the fruit, to not get the grafted male version of the fruit. Anyway, because mulberries come out of dormancy late, they've never failed to produce a crop for us, and very easy to manage fruits, and no insect or disease problems. Just the competition from birds is the only real issue that we've found with them. Um, another another crop that I think is underappreciated, and has been very rewarding for us to grow organically, um, is the chestnut. The chestnuts come in this prickly husk that is painful to handle, and it contains 1 to 3 nuts, sometimes 5 nuts that, nice, big, shiny, brown nuts with a very thin shell. You don't use a nutcracker with chestnuts, you use a knife, and you just need to make an incision before cooking them so that they don't explode because they're a seamless nut. And there's enough moisture in the nut that if you cook them without cutting them first, they will explode. Um, so what I like to do is just lay them on a cutting board and cut them in half and then throw them in a skillet on our wood stove and toss them a couple of times. And after about 8 or 10 minutes, when they start to smell good, we'll peel away the outer skin, and then there's the shell, and then there's an inner skin which adheres to the nut meat when it's cold, but when it's hot, it rubs off with the shell. And so chestnuts are grown on a tree that can get quite large and be extremely long-lived. Um, there is a chestnut tree on the slopes of Mount Etna in Sicily that is thought to be at least 2,400 years old, and remnants of it still exist there. So, uh, and they bloom in the summer. Chestnuts bloom in July, and consequently, we get a crop every year. Now, when I first started growing chestnuts, I was not successful with them at all. I read the literature on growing chestnuts, and it suggested that we grow Chinese chestnuts because the Easterners who wrote the chapter on growing chestnuts were from the East Coast, where American chestnut was the dominant hardwood 100 years ago. From New England, even up into southern Canada to the southern states, as far south as northern Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, chestnut was the dominant tree on hillsides, on well-drained soils. It was the dominant hardwood. And the wood was very useful. It splits easily. It's rot resistant even when it's young. The bark was used for tanning hides. The leaves were used as a good source of tannin also. Um, Chestnut wood was used for shake roofs, for split rails, log cabins, telegraph poles, railroad ties, very useful wood. Because they bloom in the summer, they're not affected by late frost like many of our nut crops or fruit crops. So we get a crop every year. The prickly husk is an incredibly effective deterrent against jays and squirrels from getting the nuts before they're ripe. Unlike walnuts and hazelnuts and such, they have no access to them until they're ripe. And then we generally use leather gloves to pop open the husk, either that or stepping on the husk to release the nuts. And they're incredibly productive trees. I We have many trees now that are producing in excess of 100 pounds a year, 20-plus-year-old trees. But when I first started growing chestnuts, I was having a lot of issues. First of all, the literature recommended Chinese chestnuts because they were resistant to the blight that killed off the American chestnut forest. And Chinese chestnuts are what the chestnut blight fungus co-evolved on, as well as the Japanese chestnut. And so they had natural resistance to this fungal blight disease that destroyed the American chestnut forest. Now, if you want to see great examples of American chestnuts, go to the Mills and Mills Cemetery in Tumwater. It's the Trosper Road exit off the freeway. Make like you're going to, there's a Fred Meyer store there, and then a Walmart store. Right across the street from the Walmart store is the Mills and Mills Cemetery. And the Mills and Mills Cemetery, 150 years ago, was the farm of Jesse Ferguson, who came out west with the George Bush and Michael Simmons party, the first American settlers of the Tumwater region. And George Bush brought trees with him, and including the butternut tree that just died a year or two ago, was the oldest and largest butternut tree in the world. And just out there by the airport in south of Tumwater. The American chestnuts that still exist in what was Jesse Ferguson's farm and is now the Mills and Mills Cemetery across from the Walmart are among the largest surviving American chestnuts in the whole world. Uh, they they were actually featured in a National Geographic article on American chestnuts about 10 years ago. And these trees are uh, they're over 95 feet tall, and the widest one has a branch spread of 90 feet from branch tip to branch tip. Trunks about 6 feet thick. So with a mausoleum between the two trees, and you can't miss them if you go into the Mills and Mills Cemetery because they made a circle road around these two giant trees. So you can't miss them. And unfortunately, they're not good producers. Uh, I think maybe they're too closely related. They produce a few nuts every year. I got about 100 nuts from them this year. Most of the husks are blank because it doesn't help that there are squirrels living in the tree. But I've opened up a lot of the husks and they're just not effectively pollinating each other for some odd reason. But at any rate, those are American chestnuts. They have really tiny nuts, not like these giant European and Japanese types that produce these great big nuts. And uh, and so we found, chestnuts have become a real staple food for us. We use them in well, just let's see. This week, I've made a stuffing with them. I made a chestnut casserole, and I used them in a soup. And also, I'll often just snack on them, just as is roasted. You can microwave them, you can steam them, you can boil them, you can bake them. You just have to cook them a few minutes so that you can remove the bitter inner skin, and then they're delicious, all by themselves with nothing added. Nutritionally, they're kind of like rice or potatoes. We actually have a neighbor who wrote a great chestnut cookbook, and a neighbor of ours, and Annie Bhagwandan, and it's a very nice book. Um, and if anyone is interested in more information, there's a chestnut handbook also that we sell. It's written by some Europeans, and it's a very thorough commercial guide to producing chestnuts. One book I really like, though, is called How to Grow Your Own Nuts. And it's written by Michael Crawford, who's an Englishman. And what I find in general that English gardening books often have a lot more applicability to our climate here than do gardening books written back east, because our climate, is more maritime type climate like is found in England. At any rate, he has a great chapter on growing all the different kinds of nuts, including chestnuts. Uh, and But we found it to be a very satisfactory crop. It's become an export crop for us. We ship our chestnuts all over the United States now through our mail order business. And we also sell it to wholesalers. Our fresh chestnut crops go to several wholesalers, and as far as Vancouver, Canada, and as far south as LA. Um, uh, and they're an easy crop to grow organically. We don't have any insects associated with chestnuts here. We don't have chestnut blight to be an issue here. The Chinese chestnuts that I tried growing the first 10 years that I was trying to grow chestnuts just didn't fruit well consistently for me. And there seemed to be better adapted to the hot, humid conditions as are found in China and as are found in the eastern United States. So what I did, because I really wanted to grow chestnuts, is I checked out chestnuts on old homesteads throughout the Northwest, and I got starts from some of them. For example, in East Olympia, I found on Chestnut Hill Road in East Olympia 3 gigantic chestnuts that were brought out west in the mid 1800s by the Whitten family, and those trees are still there. They're European American hybrids with nice big nuts, and nice big nuts, and unlike the American, and they're well adapted here. And these are giant trees. When I measured one of them last, it took 3 6-foot adults and a 10-year-old to grow around the trunk. Uh, and um, so very productive. Every year they're very productive. They never fail to produce a good crop. Once I've identified varieties that have worked well in the Pacific Northwest, and I've gone through a lot of varieties, probably close to 100, and I've whittled it down to, probably I'm growing about 40 or 50 now, different varieties. A lot of the most successful ones from us are varieties. Well, I have 2 replications from the Witten trees because they're nice nuts. They're good producers. They taste great. Um, and we call them Witten North and Witten South. We graft them and sell those trees. And we found other trees on old homesteads and such. I also went through the very laborious with red tape and inspections introducing chestnut varieties from other parts of the world. About 25 years ago, we brought in varieties from Italy, France, and Spain, Portugal, Korea, and Japan, through a very laborious process to get them through inspections and such, which took a few years before we could release them, take them out of a greenhouse even, to make sure that we didn't bring in, any kind of problem that, because the classic example of ecological disaster is chestnut blight. We're wiped out the whole species back east. Now the biggest surviving ones are in isolation in Washington and Oregon of the American chestnut, which is very blight susceptible. Um, uh, Many of the varieties that we grow now at our farm are hybrids between the Japanese chestnut, which is better adapted than the Chinese chestnut to Western Washington, and European chestnuts. We seem to be very well adapted to Western Washington, and also hybrids with American and European chestnuts. So those are mostly what we're growing now, are these hybrids. And the chestnut blight isn't the real threat here that it is back east because, well, chestnuts are they have a bit of immortality in that a lot of the trees are still surviving as root sprouts, even though they may have been killed back by blight in the 1930s. They still send up suckers from the roots. The trees will send up suckers and get blighted after a few years, die back again, and then send up more suckers again. So they're still doing that. If they're not totally shaded out, they're still doing that. Uh, and chestnuts have a real strong ability to resprout from suckers. In fact, chestnuts are often grown as a timber crop, as a coppice crop, or pollard crop in other parts of the world for the rot-resistant wood quality that they have. They make excellent fence posts from a coppice. If you plant out, to give you an example, if you planted out a chestnut seed and let it grow into a tree, and then 5 years later cut it down, you'd have a 5-year-old root system well established. And what it would do the following summer is it would send up a number of shoots that would probably get 6 to 8 feet tall in one summer, straight as an arrow. And so if you manage them for, say, 5 years, 5 to 7 years, you get something a nice diameter that would make a rot-resistant fence post, or something like that, wherever you want a rot-resistant pole, or grape trellis, or hop trellis, or something like that. So chestnuts are managed in some parts of the world for their wood as a coppice, cutting them down every 5 or 7 years just for the pole production. In addition to the nuts. Now, if you cut them back to the ground, you're not going to get much in the way of nuts, obviously, but they are, if you allow them to become big trees, they can get truly massive over time and be productive. I've seen individual trees produce 1,000 pounds a year on one tree. So a massive old tree. One in Centralia was doing that before it was cut down. It would produce between 400 and 1,200 pounds a year. in the 15 years that I tracked it. Another tree I found in Portland was producing over 1,000 pounds a year. So big old tree. So they have wonderful potential. And nutritionally, as I say, it's a delicious nut that's very versatile. You can make chestnut flour, chestnut beer. You can bake with it. It's gluten-free, and it's sweet. Especially if it's dried, you can dry chestnuts. If you dry chestnuts till they're rock hard, that's when you grind them up into a flour. And as the chestnuts get drier and drier, they get sweeter and sweeter because the starches get converted to sugars and they get very sweet. But then they get so hard that they'll keep forever then. Once they're dried, you can stick them in a jar and they'll keep for a year at room temperature. But to make them edible, you'd need to either grind them up into flour or soak them like you would a dried bean in a soup or something like that to rehydrate them essentially. So the fourth crop that I would like to talk about today this evening is elderberry. Now we have two species of elderberry that are native to Western Washington, the reds and the blues. The reds are found in the shade, very common as an understory shrub in the forest. They're quite shade tolerant. They have nice white clusters of flowers in the spring, and they have red berries in big clusters in early to midsummer. And the red elderberries are considered somewhat toxic, raw. They should not be eaten raw. The native peoples did utilize them cooked. Only cooked. And the blue elderberries are much more desirable as an eating berry than the reds. The blues are not shade tolerant. They're extremely vigorous. When I first came here, my neighbor was clearing land across from my property, and I walked over to him one day to find out how to clear land. And he had a gigantic blue elderberry that was at least 35 feet tall and at least that wide, and which presented, a real challenge if you wanted to harvest the fruit. But that's how big blue elderberries are capable of getting, given enough time. And this is a very multi-stem shrub growing in the open. Blue elderberries will only grow in the open. They're not shade tolerant at all, unlike the red elderberries. But blue elderberries bloom in the summer and not in the spring. And their fruits are ripe in the fall, in September. And they're quite tasty. The berries are small, BB-sized berries, but in big clusters. I had some blue elderberries growing on my land, just volunteers. And it was frustrating because the fruit was up 20, 25 feet and I couldn't reach it. I didn't want to haul a ladder, a gigantic ladder and risk my neck trying to get the fruit. So I cut it down to harvest the fruit, and it just sprouted right back again. The following year, it was 10, 12 feet tall and fruiting again right away, fruiting, the following year. So we grow elderberries commercially, but what we mostly grow commercially are the black elderberries. The black elderberries are native to the Midwestern United States, from the southern states right up into Nova Scotia, Canada, and Saskatchewan and Alberta and the Great Plains of Canada. These are very tough plants. They're very hardy. They can take heat. They can take drought. They can take extreme cold. They grow very quickly. They bear fruit very quickly. The American elderberries that I planted around 1981 are still fruiting heavily as bushes that I can go out and reach. I don't need to use a ladder to reach the crop. I can harvest the whole crop just standing on the ground and reaching upwards, picking off the clusters of fruits, dinner plate sized clusters of berries. Another type of elderberry that we grow is the European elderberry. and that is Sambucus nigra. And the European elderberry is very similar to our American black elderberry. Um, I would say the biggest difference with the European elderberry is the flowers are more fragrant. When we were in Europe a few years ago, we were in Italy. I'm sorry, we were in Ireland, England, and Norway on our last trip, and all three countries we found elderberry flower drinks were very popular. They're very fragrant, and so the flowers of elderberries are also edible. In fact, you can use elderberry flowers as we use them in salads in the summer. I've seen recipes, which I haven't tried, on battering elderberry flowers and frying them. So there's a lot of things you can do with them in addition to the berries. Um, um, the literature does recommend cooking them, although I've eaten them raw for 40 some years. I um, uh, we make elderberry syrups, and we make for ourselves. Just we're making elderberry wine this year, and it's a very versatile fruit. You can, it's not a fruit that you'd want to eat raw, really. I mean, you don't want to eat olives raw either. They're inedible raw, and cranberries are not edible raw. A lot of things are not edible raw. Uh, but uh, um, but you sweeten them up and they can make a decent pie or jam, wine, juice, tincture, whatever. If you go into a big grocery store and go to their um, uh, natural medicine section, Fred Meyer or Safeway, or any of those grocery stores, I've counted over 85 products with black elderberry in them for boosting your immune system. There is nothing better on this earth that I know of for boosting your immune system and shortening the duration of colds and flu than elderberry. So, and I've had a crop of elderberries since the year after we planted them. They have never failed to produce a heavy crop, even though they start very early to vegetate. I was seeing swollen green growth on them weeks ago, uh, but they never seem to be bothered by late frost. Very dependable crop, and absolutely foolproof, really. And multi-stem shrub, very easy to grow from cuttings. Um, and you can grow them as hardwood cuttings. You can grow them as softwood cuttings. They're very easy to propagate. Um, it's it's uh, it's a wonderful fruit, and one of the easiest fruits to grow, certainly. And so I'm really pleased with our crop of elderberries, and so we planted out quite a few hundred bushes now, to grow commercially. So I think that covers pretty much what I wanted to cover with you today. There's a good book on growing elderberries, but like I say, they're a very easy crop to grow. This is Everything Elderberry: How to Forage, Cultivate, and Cook with this amazing natural remedy. So are there any questions about anything? Yeah.
Wow, real interesting.
I have a question.
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Think so.
Michael, I have a question. I'm curious if you ever find any Drosophila worms in mulberries.
Um, I've never really had much a problem with that insect. And I'm not sure why. We're organic growers. We've never sprayed for it. I've trapped it. I put out traps and trapped them. Um, I've never seen it as a problem. I don't know why. I guess we just have enough biological diversity here that they're at such a low population level because there's so many things that are eating them. We have, you know, we have so many birds here and bats at night, and I don't know. I'm very blessed in that regard. It's never been a problem with any of our soft fruits.
No kidding. That's
Yep.
the blessing.
Yeah.
They do affect mulberry, right? Pardon? They would affect mulberry. We had them on mulberry in that apartment.
I would think they would get into most any soft fruit, is my understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they get into my plums a lot, but my plums are early plums and they don't seem to get into the ones on the exact same property. 3
Interesting.
later, and so I think
Mhm.
that they, you know, the early fruit, they take advantage of, and then later there might be more fruit other places or something.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
you know, it's, and both of them are, you know, Italian fruit plums, and one's a
Uh-huh.
the later, but.
Yeah, I started trapping them just to see if they were there, and yeah, they're definitely here. Just
Yeah, I'm talking about the spotted wing, if anybody wonders, spotted wing, spotted one, or blue one.
yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
I've never looked for them. I pick a lot of mulberries from a couple of trees. And I just eat mulberries galore and I don't even wanna pick, I don't even wanna look.
Yeah, I don't blame you. You don't want to know about that extra
No,
protein.
I don't.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I can't blame you. Yeah. No, well, I've looked, never seen them.
Uh,
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
No kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have seen them, I mean, I've seen them in fruits occasionally. I've seen them in a blackberry, and in a cherry. It's just very rare,
Mhm.
though, for some reason. Yeah.
Hmm.
A lot of critters around here, I'll tell you. Every kind of critter. Yeah. So it's
Other-
good, I guess, to have a balance.
well, Yeah.
One
Uh,
of the things you mentioned also, on the fuzzy kiwis, you were
Yeah.
talking about the Arctic beauty.
Yeah.
But then I was wondering if, which one, was it the Arctic beauty that's? Oh. Um. I can tell I'm late, it's getting tired. I forget the question.
Well, the Arctic beauty blooms earlier than the other two species of kiwi that I mentioned, even
Right.
though it's the most winter hardy and can tolerate 40 below zero. It is
Wow.
actually more susceptible to a spring frost because the part of the world that it comes from, Siberia, has extremely cold winters. And then, it comes out of dormancy only when it starts to warm up and then it stays warm, so it's whereas here we can have, cold slaps, cold spells like we're experiencing now, but we can also have warm spells in late winter that brings things out of dormancy. So
Yeah.
we actually, the Arctic beauty kiwi is actually more susceptible to a late frost because of that. And that would be an advantage to actually growing it in the shade. Growing it in the shade, where, as I say, it's quite shade tolerant, would delay its coming out of dormancy as opposed to growing it in full sun. And that could be helpful in protecting it from a late frost. Um, um, with regards to the hardy kiwis and the fuzzy kiwis, they normally come out of dormancy late enough that we're not bothered by a frost. I would say we did have a reduced crop this last year because we had a warm day in April that approached 80 degrees in April. And this was, I forget when in April. The following week it was in the mid 20s. The following week, and so the kiwis started to push bud. They started to come out of dormancy, and with those mid 20s, a lot of that new growth was blackened, and that's where a lot of the flowers would have occurred on that new growth. Fortunately, not all the buds started, and so we still got a crop, but it was greatly reduced. I would say our crop last year was reduced by 70% from the year before because of, that one freak weather incident. Um, so one thing that we could have done would have been to turn the sprinklers on, but we're not really set up. Actually, I've quit irrigating them. I haven't irrigated them for several years now because they're such established vines, they just don't seem to need it. And so I've let my irrigation system lapse in that regard. But if you just have one vine or a couple vines, and they've started to come out of dormancy, and real cold weather threatens. If you turn the sprinklers on, that can give them quite a few degrees of protection.
Mhm.
Even if the water freezes, the tissue damage occurs, water freezes at 32, but the tissue damage is going to occur probably at around 27 degrees or something like that, 28, 27. So the ice can actually protect the new growth. So weirdly.
Mhm. Questions?
I have two questions.
Yes.
The first is, what do you use to grind the dry chestnuts? I found that everything I've tried has really gunked up, it gets gunked up and it's not successful.
Yeah, I am not an authority on that. At all. I know that there are there are two operations that I know of, one in Southwest Washington, in Clark County, and one in the Willamette Valley of Oregon that sell chestnut flour. And they have a commercial drying operation with chestnuts. What we find is that, I mean, we filled up a 50-foot long by 30-foot cooler with chestnuts as we were harvesting them and shipping them out. So we had a lot of chestnuts, but by the third week of December, we were completely sold out, and that happens every year. I never have surplus to tinker around with that sort of thing, and so I still have chestnuts in the crisper of my refrigerator for my own use, but I just like to snack on them and use them in cooking. But the dried chestnuts the flour that I've had was given to me by a friend, so they do that, and I have no experience with doing that. So.
Okay, and then my other question was, I'm looking for tips on propagating mulberry and elderberry from cuttings. Do you do
Yeah,
that?
well,
Do you do that when you put them in right now?
yeah, elderberries, you want to take your cuttings right away. Don't delay with that. But I've actually stuck elderberry cuttings in a jar of water on a windowsill for several weeks, and then they made roots into the water. And then you can just pot them up. Normally, though, what we do with elderberries is I'll take the cuttings this time of the year, and then we just put them into cold storage, like in Ziploc bags with a damp piece of paper until later in the spring when the ground warms a bit, and then we'll stick them into pots or stick them into beds in the field even to root them. They're pretty easy to root as hardwood cuttings. And the same with kiwis. And with mulberries, we've grafted mulberries for close on 40 years now, and we mostly graft them, but we are increasingly starting to root them from cuttings also. And with mulberries, it can vary from one variety to another as to how easy they are to root from cuttings. But you want to have fresh wood that's completely dormant. And once again, if you don't have a facility to root them in, then I would suggest keeping them in Ziploc bags in the refrigerator with a damp piece of paper until much later in the spring when the ground warms up. Now, if you have a greenhouse with bottom heat and a misting chamber, then you can take your cuttings right now, under controlled conditions. That would be a way of rooting them. But for someone who doesn't have that sort of thing, you want to wait until your medium is going to be much warmer. But you want to have the wood dormant until then. So I would take the material now or in the next few weeks and keep it refrigerated until much later in the spring. In a warm climate, if we were in California, you could just take a foot-long cutting of a mulberry and stick it in the ground and it will root. But you can't necessarily do that here as easily because our ground is so cold and wet. until, May or June, so.
What varieties are most easily rooted like that?
Well, so far, we've got early bird mulberry on its own roots, and a new variety from Korea, Iksubong, and Pakistan, we're starting to root now on its own roots. And Illinois everbearing, yeah. So those are the 4 varieties that we've succeeded with so far. And we're experimenting with some other ones, with a
Do
lot of
you,
yeah.
do you use rooting hormone for those?
Well, I use this stuff called Easy Root. It's approved for organic use, and it's actually different species of bacteria. And it does promote rooting, and that's what I've used instead of a rooting hormone. But certainly a rooting hormone is going to increase your odds of success over just using nothing. But I use this Easy Rooting stuff just because it's, certified for organic production and such, and it's called Easy Root. And I think if you just go to easyroot.com and you can look it up and you can mail order it. It comes in little packets. It's only like $6 or $10 or something like that, and it's enough powder to root hundreds of cuttings. Yep, Easy Root. Yeah.
And since we're on the topic of cuttings, and Cynthia brought those big cuttings, I wonder if you'd share how you do, what you recommend for everyone with the Desert King. We got
Oh, to root Desert King figs?
Yeah.
Oh, figs are real easy to root. Yeah, yeah. But once again, this is a good time to take cuttings of figs. If you have bottom heat and misting chamber, it's so much the better. If you don't, we normally store the cuttings until a little later in the spring when things warm up. But with Desert King figs, you can stick them in the ground and they'll probably root. But you'll have your best odds if you put them in a pot. Like you could stick them halfway down into a gallon pot, for example, or even a 4-inch pot if your cuttings are short enough. And just use a good rooting medium, something that's well aerated but holds moisture reasonably well. Temperature, is what's going to induce rooting is getting warm temperatures. Sometimes when for large quantities of grapes, for example, we'll take a whole bundle of grape cuttings and if you don't have room in a refrigerator, this is one way you can store lots of cuttings. We take whole bundles of grape cuttings and just invert them upside down, this whole bundle of grape cuttings, into a trench of sawdust or sand or even earth. And then when they're inverted upside down, and so this bundle, which is maybe a foot long, of 100 cuttings, put upside down in the trench, then by being upside down, a foot down, it's much cooler than it is close to the surface. Now at the surface, the base of the cuttings are covered with a couple of inches of sand or soil or sawdust, and those will tend to warm up faster. What'll happen is that callus tissue will form at the base of each cutting because it's warmer up there. And the callus tissue is a precursor to root growth. So that's to store them in the winter, and then in the spring when the ground is warmed up, or when you're ready to put them into pots, you can invert them all and stick them into pots, or put them out into a bed row in the ground, and they will start to make roots. As they start to come out of dormancy and make leaves, they will make roots. And figs are very easy to root from cuttings. And Desert King is one. I have tried probably 30 or 40 varieties of figs, and I'm at 1,100-foot elevation. So I'm a zone colder than the Olympia area, or at least a zone colder than, Olympia area close to the Sound. The Olympia Airport is a notoriously cold spot. But Desert King is the one fig I can depend on every year. Most of the other fig varieties that I've tried at my location have died out on me, died back considerably. Desert King is my #1 fig. Number 2, Italian honey fig and Violette de Bordeaux is pretty good here. Olympian fig, it's not hardy for me. It's not hardy. The original Olympian fig is a stone's throw from Puget Sound. It's a more protected area. It's not nearly as hardy as Desert King. So, but it does great in Olympia if you're close to the water or right in town, as long as you're not out by the airport.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Want to go about Jasper to people.
Neat. Other questions?
Yep. So Michael, when you say a good medium for growing figs, when you say aerated and holds moisture, you're talking about like peat and sands?
Sure, peat and sand would be good. We have tons of pumice here because I've got a 3 volcano view. I can see 3 volcanoes. So pumice is cheap and plentiful, and we use pumice instead of sand because it keeps the medium a lot lighter and produces a lot of porosity, a lot of air, in the medium. You need to have good air, in the medium. So sand or pumice or vermiculite, those are all good things to mix with peat moss, or whatever other medium you use, composted bark or whatever.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. It's my
There.
pleasure. If anyone has any other questions, I'll be down at the market starting in April on Saturdays.
Okay. And I wanted to put in a plug for your tours that you have in the summer. Wow, I learned so much. They at the end they share some fruit samples, yeah, with you, depending on when you're there, if it's July or August or September. And yeah, that was super.
Yeah,
All right.
good fun.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
reserve a spot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Michael, again, thank you. Thank you so much. And we appreciate your sharing your knowledge with us.
I'm glad you didn't have to drive in.
Yes,
Well, thank you. I'm sorry about the delay. Like I say, I'm
that's okay.
not good on computers, but
That's okay. Well, thank you.
all right. Thank you.
We'll be in touch later.
Okay. All right.
Good night.
Bye.
And I guess I will close this meeting, close the recording. So, yeah.